The laughter echoed across the marble lobby before anyone dared to breathe. A young manager pointed at the poor janitor's worn-out shoes, as if her poverty was entertainment. "Look at those shoes," he mocked loud enough for visitor staff and executives to hear. The old woman lowered her eyes, holding her mop with trembling hands, while everyone watched in silence. But behind the glass elevator doors, the billionaire CEO froze. His face changed. His heart dropped. Because the woman being humiliated was not just a janitor. She was his mother. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your country. And if stories like this touch your heart, please subscribe and join our storytelling family. Lagos never waited for anyone. Before sunrise, buses already fought through crowded roads, while street vendors shouted beside long lines of exhausted workers. In Victoria Island, glass towers reflected the first light of morning, standing above the chaos like symbols of power and success. Among them stood Okonkwo Global Holdings. The company tower was famous across Nigeria. Politicians visited its offices. International investors praised its growth. Young graduates dreamed of working there one day. Inside the building, marble floors shined beneath expensive chandeliers, while executives in tailored suits walked confidently through silent hallways. At the top of the empire was Chidi Okonkwo. At 38 years old, Chidi had become one of the youngest billionaires in West Africa. Newspapers admired his discipline and intelligence. Business magazines called him the face of modern African success. But long before the luxury offices and billion-dollar contracts, Chidi had belonged to a poor widow named Abeniola Okonkwo. Years earlier, Abeniola sold rice and beans beside a roadside in Enugu to feed her son after her husband died. She worked under rain, heat, and dust without complaint. Sometimes she returned home hungry because she used her last money to buy school books for Chidi. She raised him with one belief above all others: never humiliate poor people. When Chidi was younger, he listened carefully. He greeted cleaners respectfully. He shared food with classmates who had none. He once cried after seeing a school janitor insulted by a teacher. But success changed him slowly. As his company grew larger, Chidi became harder, colder, and distant. He spent more time studying profit charts than studying people. Reports mattered more than conversations. Executives beneath him quickly learned that results impressed him more than compassion. Abeniola noticed the change with growing sadness. Whenever she visited the company, junior staff looked tense. Receptionists smiled nervously. Security guards avoided eye contact with management. Something inside the building felt wrong. Then she began hearing stories about a man named Tunde Balogun. Tunde was the operations manager at Okonkwo Global. Senior executives praised him because profits kept increasing under his supervision. But lower workers feared him deeply. He insulted cleaners publicly. He shouted at receptionists. He deducted salaries over tiny mistakes. And according to rumors, he treated poor workers like they were beneath human dignity. One evening, Abeniola visited Chidi at his mansion in Ikoyi. The house was beautiful but cold. Soft lights reflected across expensive furniture, while servants moved quietly through the hallways. Chidi sat at the dining table checking business documents even during dinner. Abeniola watched him silently before asking, "Do your workers still smile when they see you?" Chidi looked confused. "Mama, I asked if the people working under you are treated well. He sighed tiredly. Mama, this is business. You cannot build a successful company by focusing on emotions all the time. And you cannot build a good company without humanity, she replied calmly. Chidi rubbed his forehead. People complain everywhere. What if they are not complaining? She asked softly. What if they are suffering? For a moment, silence filled the room. Abeniola looked at her son and remembered the gentle boy she once raised beside dusty streets and noisy bus stops. Wealth had not destroyed him completely, but it had covered his heart with layers of pride and distance. That night, she made a decision. Instead of confronting him directly, Abeniola secretly applied for a temporary janitorial position through the company's cleaning contractor. She used the simple name Mama Beni and told nobody who she truly was. She wanted to see the company with her own eyes. She wanted to discover how ordinary workers were treated when powerful people were not watching. 3 days later, before sunrise, Abeniola arrived at Okonkwo Global Holdings wearing a faded cleaning uniform and carrying a small handbag. On her feet were old black shoes with cracked leather and worn soles. Those shoes had survived years of poverty beside Lagos roads. She intentionally chose them. At the service entrance, a board security guard barely looked at her ID card before waving her inside. The back hallways of the company looked completely different from the luxurious public lobby upstairs. Pipes lined the ceilings. Cleaning supplies filled narrow storage rooms. Workers hurried nervously from one corridor to another. A tired supervisor handed Abeniola a mop and bucket. You clean the ground floor lobby, the woman said quickly. Management hates seeing dirt. Abeniola nodded politely. When she entered the main lobby, she paused briefly. The building was beautiful. Chandeliers glowed above polished marble floors, while large glass windows overlooked the busy streets outside. A giant silver sign displayed the company logo beside a digital portrait of Chidi, smiling confidently in a suit. Her son owned all of this. Yet the workers cleaning it seemed invisible. Abeniola lowered her mop into the water and began working quietly. As the morning passed, she noticed fear everywhere. A receptionist apologized repeatedly after answering a phone call too slowly. A security guard trembled while speaking to a senior manager. 2 cleaners whispered nervously about salary deductions. Nobody relaxed when management walked by. Near noon, Abeniola knelt beside the marble floor, cleaning muddy footprints left by visitors escaping the rain outside. Suddenly, laughter echoed through the lobby. A group of managers approached confidently, their polished shoes clicking against the floor. One man stopped directly beside her. Well, he said mockingly, staring at her feet, those shoes look older than this building. The others laughed immediately. Abeniola slowly lifted her eyes. The speaker was tall, sharply dressed, and wearing an expensive gold wristwatch. Arrogance rested naturally across his face. She recognized him instantly. Tunda Balogan. He pointed openly at her cracked shoes. This is a corporate headquarters, not a village market. More laughter followed. Several nearby employees lowered their heads uncomfortably, but nobody defended her. Not one person. Abeniola felt humiliation burn quietly inside her chest. Not because of the insult itself, but because cruelty had become normal enough for people to stay silent. Still kneeling on the floor, she answered softly, "I'm sorry, sir." Tunde smirked proudly before walking away with his group. Their laughter slowly disappeared into the hallway. For several seconds, Abeniola remained silent beside her bucket and mop. Then she looked down at the old shoes that had carried her through years of struggle while raising the son who now owned the building above her. Pain filled her eyes, but so did determination. At that moment, Abeniola made herself a promise. She would remain inside the company. She would keep pretending to be invisible. And before revealing who she truly was, she would uncover every hidden cruelty living beneath the polished image of her son's empire. The second morning of Abeniola's secret job began with rain. Heavy clouds hung over Lagos while workers hurried through puddles toward the glowing tower of Okonkwo Global Holdings. The streets outside were noisy and alive, but inside the company building, tension moved quietly beneath polite greetings and forced smiles. Abeniola arrived before most employees. Her faded uniform was neatly washed despite its age. Her old black shoes were still cracked along the sides, but polished carefully with a small cloth the night before. Poverty had taught her many things, and one of them was this. Even when life humiliates you, never stop carrying yourself with dignity. At the service entrance, the same security guard barely glanced at her. "You are early again, Mama Benny," he muttered. Abeniola smiled softly. Work should not wait for old bones like mine. The man almost smiled back, but stopped himself quickly, after noticing another supervisor nearby. Fear lived inside many workers in that building. Even kindness seemed dangerous when management was watching. Inside the janitorial storage room, cleaners prepared quietly for the day ahead. Some tied aprons around their waists, while others filled buckets with water and disinfectant. Nobody talked loudly. Nobody relaxed. A young cleaner named Saad whispered to another worker, "Did you hear?" Tunde shouted at the receptionist. "Again? Yesterday?" "Keep your voice down," the other woman warned immediately. "Walls have ears in this place." Abeniola listened silently while arranging cleaning cloths inside her bucket. By 8 o'clock, the main lobby was crowded with employees rushing toward elevators. Expensive perfume mixed with the scent of coffee and rainwater. Executives crossed the marble floor without noticing the workers cleaning around them. Abeniola moved slowly across the lobby, with her mop watching people carefully. She noticed how junior staff immediately lowered their voices whenever senior managers approached. She noticed how cleaners stepped aside quickly, like shadows, whenever executives walked past. Even the receptionists kept nervous smiles fixed on their faces for hours. This was not respect. It was fear dressed like professionalism. Near the reception desk stood a young woman with tired eyes and neatly braided hair. Her name tag read Nkechi Adeyemi. Unlike the others, Nkechi greeted people warmly instead of mechanically. Even while answering phones and checking visitor badges, she still managed to smile at nervous interns and confused guests. Abeniola noticed something else too. Nkechi looked exhausted, not lazy exhausted, life exhausted. Around midday, while wiping fingerprints from a glass wall near reception, Abeniola saw Nkechi quietly remove her high heels beneath the desk and rub her swollen feet for a few seconds before quickly putting the shoes back on. The gesture was small, but Abeniola understood it immediately. That was the movement of someone working through pain because missing work was not an option. A few minutes later, Tunde Balogun entered the lobby with two senior managers behind him. Conversations became quieter instantly. Tunde walked confidently across the marble floor, wearing an expensive navy blue suit and polished brown shoes. Everything about him seemed carefully designed to impress people. He stopped beside the reception desk. "Nkechi," he said sharply. "Yes, sir." "Why is visitor registration taking so long today?" Her face tightened slightly. "The system slowed down because of the rain network issue, sir. IT is already—" "I do not want excuses." Several nearby employees lowered their heads immediately. Tunde leaned closer. "People are paying this company for excellence, not village-level service." "I understand, sir." "No, you clearly do not." The humiliation was quiet, but deliberate. Tunde enjoyed correcting people publicly because it reminded everyone who held power. After a final glare, he walked away toward the elevators. Only after he disappeared did the lobby slowly breathe again. Abeniola stared after him silently. Then she looked back at Nkechi, who immediately forced another professional smile for arriving visitors, even though embarrassment still burned in her eyes. That afternoon, during lunch break, most executives disappeared into private offices or expensive restaurants nearby. The lower workers gathered in hidden corners of the building with homemade food packed inside plastic containers. Abeniola sat alone near the back staircase, eating bread and drinking water. After a moment, someone approached quietly. It was Nkechi. "You can sit with me, Mama," the young receptionist said gently. Abeniola smiled. "Thank you, my daughter." They sat together on a small bench near the emergency exit. Nkechi opened a food container holding rice and stew, though the portion was small. Without hesitation, she divided it into two. "No, child," Abeniola protested softly. "This is your food." Nkechi shook her head. "You worked since morning without resting." Abeniola looked at the young woman carefully. Kindness from poor people always touched her deeply because she understood the cost behind it. Rich people often gave from comfort. Poor people gave from sacrifice. "God will remember your heart," Abeniola said quietly. Nkechi laughed weakly. "I hope so. Lagos is expensive." For the first time, the young receptionist relaxed enough to speak honestly. She told Abeniola about her life in a one-room apartment shared with her younger brother. Their parents had died years earlier, leaving Nkechi responsible for paying school fees while also supporting relatives back in Ibadan. "This job is stressful," she admitted softly, "but without it, my brother cannot stay in university." Abeniola listened with deep sadness. Nkechi was exactly the kind of person companies like Okonkwo Global depended on hardworking, responsible, and quietly suffering. Yet people like Tunde treated workers like her as disposable. "Do not let bitterness change your spirit," Abeniola told her gently. Nkechi smiled sadly. "Sometimes I am tired of pretending everything is okay." Before Abeniola could answer, a loud voice interrupted them. "So this is where employees come to waste company time." The women turned immediately. Tunde stood near the staircase entrance with visible irritation on his face. Nkechi rose quickly. "Sir, it is lunch break. And did I permit social gatherings during office hours?" His eyes moved toward Abeniola with clear annoyance. "You again," he muttered. Abeniola lowered her head respectfully. Tunde looked back at Nkechi. "You are a receptionist, not a charity worker. Stop behaving like this. Building is a village community center." I was only sharing lunch, sir. And next time, you can share unemployment too. Fear flashed across Nkechi's face immediately. Tunde stepped closer. If I see either of you hiding during work hours again, there will be consequences. Without another word, he turned and walked away. Silence remained behind him. Nkechi sat down slowly, her appetite completely gone. I am sorry, Mama, she whispered. He enjoys humiliating people. Abeniola placed a gentle hand over the young woman's trembling fingers. My daughter, she said softly. People who enjoy humiliating others are usually hiding wounds inside themselves. Nkechi looked confused. After everything he does, you still speak kindly about him. Abeniola stared toward the hallway where Tunde had disappeared. No, she replied quietly. But hatred creates more darkness. Someone must still choose light. For several seconds, neither woman spoke. Far above them, executives continued discussing contracts and profits inside air-conditioned offices, unaware that two underpaid workers sat near a back staircase carrying invisible burdens heavier than any business report. And as Abeniola looked at Nkechi's tired face, her determination grew stronger. She had entered the company searching for truth. Now she was beginning to understand the human cost hidden beneath the polished success of her son's empire. By the end of her first week inside Okonkwo Global Holdings, Abeniola understood one painful truth. The company did not run on loyalty. It ran on fear. Every morning, workers entered the building carrying invisible anxiety on their shoulders. Receptionists checked their appearance nervously before Tunde Balogun arrived. Cleaners rushed through hallways terrified of missing tiny spots of dirt. Security guards stood unnaturally straight whenever senior management approached. Nobody wanted to attract Tunde's attention, because attention from Tunde almost always ended in humiliation. On Monday morning, the operations manager entered the lobby wearing a charcoal gray suit and dark sunglasses, despite the cloudy weather outside. Two assistant managers followed closely behind him, laughing too loudly at every joke he made. Abeniola watched quietly while polishing the metal rail near the elevators. Tunde enjoyed performing power in public. That was something she had already noticed. Who cleaned this glass? He suddenly snapped, stopping near the reception desk. A young cleaner immediately stepped forward. Sir, I did. Tunde pointed toward a tiny fingerprint, barely visible beneath the bright lobby lights. So this is excellence to you. The cleaner swallowed nervously. I'm sorry, sir. I will clean it again. You people always say sorry after embarrassing the company. Everyone nearby became silent immediately. The young cleaner rushed to wipe the glass again while Tunde shook his head dramatically like a disappointed king surrounded by failures. Abeniola lowered her eyes, not because she feared him, because she was studying him. Tunde did not simply correct workers. He enjoyed shrinking them. That afternoon, Abeniola learned more about him from whispers shared among employees. He was not always rich, one cleaner murmured, while organizing supplies. They say he grew up poor in Ajagunle, another replied quietly. Then why does he hate poor people so much? Nobody answered. But Abeniola understood something many people did not. Sometimes the cruelest people are those most ashamed of where they came from. Later that day, she saw Tunde shouting at a security guard near the parking entrance. You were supposed to open the gate before the client arrived, he barked. Sir, The automatic sensor delayed for a few seconds. I do not pay you to explain machines to me. The older guard lowered his head immediately, while nearby staff pretended not to watch. Abeniola noticed the man's trembling hands. He was probably close to retirement age. Yet Tunde spoke to him like a child. As the guard apologized repeatedly, Tunde adjusted his expensive wristwatch with visible irritation. If this happens again, he warned coldly, I will personally make sure you lose this job. Then he walked away. The old guard remained standing silently near the gate long after Tunde disappeared. Abeniola approached him slowly with her cleaning cart. My son, she said gently, do not carry his anger inside your spirit. The guard gave a weak smile. Mama Beni, men like him can destroy people like us. Her eyes softened sadly. People like us. That sentence stayed in her heart the entire afternoon. In Tunde's world, workers were divided into categories: important people and invisible people. Near evening, while cleaning outside one of the conference rooms, Abeniola overheard voices inside. The door was slightly open. Tunde has improved operational efficiency tremendously, one executive said approvingly. Yes, another agreed. Costs are lower than last quarter. Abeniola paused quietly beside her mop. Then she heard Tunde's confident voice. We simply removed unnecessary emotional weakness from management. Several men laughed inside the room. Workers perform better when they fear consequences. Tunde continued proudly. Compassion is good for churches, not corporations. More laughter followed. Abeniola felt disappointment settle heavily inside her chest. This was the philosophy poisoning her son's company. Not leadership, not discipline, fear. That evening, after most employees left, Abeniola continued cleaning the executive hallway alone. The building became quieter at night. Air conditioning hummed softly through empty corridors, while city lights glowed beyond the glass windows. As she pushed her cart past the accounting department, she noticed a young man still working at his desk. His tie hung loosely around his neck, and exhaustion covered his face. Several empty coffee cups sat beside stacks of documents. It was almost 9 p.m. You have not gone home, Abeniola asked gently. The young accountant looked startled before forcing a tired smile. Deadlines. Since morning, he laughed weakly. Tunde says the office closes when the work finishes. Abeniola studied him carefully. He looked barely older than 25. Have you eaten? The young man hesitated before answering honestly. Not yet. Without another word, Abeniola opened her small handbag and removed the last piece of bread she carried from home. Take, she said. The accountant looked embarrassed. No, Mama, you should eat it. I insist. Slowly he accepted the bread. Thank you, he whispered. As he ate quietly, shame filled Abeniola's heart again. Her son owned a billion-dollar company, yet workers inside it were starving through overtime. The next morning, Tunde's cruelty became even more public. A foreign investor delegation was scheduled to visit the building, and management spent hours preparing the lobby to appear flawless. Every cleaner received strict instructions. Every receptionist was warned to smile constantly. Every security guard was ordered to remain perfectly alert. Tunde moved through the building like a military commander before battle. Nothing must embarrass this company today, he announced loudly. Around noon, while Abeniola cleaned near the main entrance, a delivery worker accidentally spilled muddy water across part of the polished floor. The man apologized repeatedly. Before anyone could respond, Tunde appeared. His expression darkened instantly. "Unbelievable," he muttered. The delivery worker tried explaining, "Sir, the box slipped because of the rain outside." Silence. The entire lobby became still. Tunde looked around until his eyes landed on Abeniola. "You," he snapped. "Clean this immediately." "Yes, sir." As she hurried toward the spill with her mop, Tunde stared openly at her worn shoes again. Then he laughed softly. Honestly, he said loudly enough for nearby staff to hear those shoes depress the entire building. A few nervous employees forced small laughs. Tunde shook his head dramatically. "How can a person work in a modern company looking like this?" Abeniola felt heat rise into her face. People nearby watched silently. Nobody defended her. Again. Tunde stepped closer and pointed at her shoes openly. "I have seen cleaner shoes on street beggars." The words echoed painfully across the lobby. For one brief second, anger flashed inside Abeniola's eyes. Not because of the insult, but because humiliation had become entertainment inside the company her son built. Still, she controlled herself carefully. "I will clean the floor, sir," she said quietly. Tunde smirked with satisfaction before turning away toward the investors entering through the front doors. As Abeniola knelt on the marble floor, mopping muddy water, she heard faint whispers around her. Some workers pitied her. Others avoided looking completely. Fear had taught them silence. But one person finally moved. Nkechi stepped away from the reception desk carrying paper towels. Without speaking, she knelt beside Abeniola and began helping clean the floor. Tunde noticed immediately from across the lobby. His expression hardened. But before he could react, the foreign investors approached him with handshakes and smiles, forcing him to hide his irritation. Abeniola glanced at Nkechi quietly. "You should not risk your job for me," she whispered. Nkechi continued wiping the floor. "Somebody should stand beside you." Emotion tightened inside Abeniola's chest. In a building full of polished shoes and expensive suits, the poorest people still carried the most humanity. And while Tunde entertained wealthy investors near the glass entrance, Abeniola made another silent observation deep inside her heart. A company could fake success for visitors, but eventually the truth always revealed itself in how people treated those with no power. The deeper Abeniola looked into Okonkwo Global Holdings, the more the company frightened her. From the outside, the building represented opportunity. Young graduates proudly posted photographs beside its logo after getting hired. Parents bragged when their children received interviews there. Newspapers described the company as one of the fastest growing corporations in Africa. But beneath the polished image lived another reality. Workers were exhausted. Fear controlled conversations, and dignity had become a privilege reserved only for people with titles. Every morning, Abeniola arrived before sunrise and watched the same pattern repeat itself. Cleaners rushed nervously through hallways before executives arrived. Receptionists practiced artificial smiles in reflective glass. Junior staff whispered complaints only when managers were far away. Nobody trusted the system enough to speak openly. One Tuesday afternoon, Abeniola entered the women's restroom on the 15th floor carrying fresh towels and cleaning supplies. She stopped when she heard soft crying from one of the stalls. At first, she remained quiet. Then she heard a trembling voice whisper, "I cannot do this anymore." Abeniola gently knocked on the stall door. "My daughter, are you all right?" For several seconds, there was no answer. Finally, the door opened slowly. A young woman stood inside with tears running down her face. Her name tag identified her as Miriam Okafor, a junior accountant. "I am sorry," Miriam whispered quickly while wiping her face. "I should not be crying at work." "What happened?" Miriam hesitated before answering. Years of fear had taught employees to protect themselves carefully. "They deducted money from my salary again," she admitted softly. "My mother is sick, and I already borrowed money for her medicine." Abeniola's chest tightened. "Why did they deduct your salary?" "I submitted a financial report 6 minutes late." 6 minutes? Abeniola stared at the young woman in disbelief. "That was enough." Miriam laughed bitterly through tears. "Here, everything is enough." She explained that Tunde recently introduced discipline penalties for workers who made mistakes. Late reports, small errors, returning late from lunch, missing tight details in presentations. Money disappeared from salaries constantly. Nobody dared complain. "If you question anything," Miriam whispered, "they call you ungrateful." Abeniola listened silently, while anger slowly burned inside her chest. Not loud anger, the dangerous kind. The quiet anger of a mother watching people suffer under her son's leadership. That evening, after most executives left the building, Abeniola noticed Nkechi sitting alone behind the reception desk, staring at her phone anxiously. "You have not gone home?" Abeniola asked gently. Nkechi sighed heavily. "My landlord called again." Abeniola sat beside her quietly. "I am 2 months behind on rent," Nkechi admitted. "My brother's school fees finished everything." "What about your salary?" Nkechi lowered her eyes. "Half disappeared after penalties last month." "For what?" "One day I arrived late because the bus broke down." She forced a weak smile. "Another deduction happened because a client complained I did not smile enough." Abeniola stared at her in disbelief. Smile enough? Human beings were now being financially punished for facial expressions. Before she could respond, voices echoed from the nearby hallway. 2 male employees approached reception carrying files. "One more month here, and I will collapse," one muttered quietly. "At least you still have a job," the other replied. 3 people were fired yesterday. They stopped talking immediately after noticing Abeniola nearby. Fear again. Always fear. The next morning, Abeniola finally witnessed how deeply Tunde's cruelty reached inside the company. Around 10 a.m., a cleaner accidentally dropped a tray of bottled water near the executive elevator. Plastic bottles rolled across the marble floor, while several burst open loudly. The cleaner, an older man named Yusuf, immediately fell to his knees, trying to gather everything. "I am sorry," he kept repeating, nervously. Employees nearby slowed down to watch. Then Tunde appeared. The entire hallway became tense instantly. "What happened here?" he demanded sharply. Yusuf's hands trembled violently. "Sir?" The tray slipped. Tunde looked disgusted. "You people embarrass this company every single day." "I am sorry, sir." "Sorry does not clean floors." Without warning, Tunde kicked one of the water bottles across the hallway. "Pick it up properly." Yusuf rushed after it immediately, while employees stood frozen nearby, pretending not to see the humiliation. Abeniola gripped her mop tightly. Her heart ached, watching the older man struggle on his knees, while executives walked past without intervening. Then Tunde noticed her. "You!" he snapped. "Why are you standing there? Help clean this mess before clients arrive." "Yes, sir." As Abeniola bent beside Yusuf gathering bottles, she quietly whispered, "Do not let shame enter your spirit." The older cleaner avoided eye contact. "Thank you, Mama," he murmured weakly. Tunde remained watching them with visible irritation. "I do not understand why simple jobs are difficult for some people," he announced loudly enough for nearby staff to hear. Nobody answered, because everyone knew the truth. The problem was never the work. The problem was him. Later that afternoon, Abeniola was assigned to clean part of the administration office where salary and operational records were stored. While dusting shelves near a filing cabinet, she overheard two HR officers speaking quietly. "Have you seen the welfare fund reports?" one asked nervously. "Keep your voice down," the other warned immediately. "The numbers are not matching." Abeniola slowed her movements carefully without drawing attention. "What do you mean?" "There should be more money allocated for staff medical support and overtime compensation." The second officer looked around anxiously before lowering her voice even further. "Tunde approved several transfers personally, and some funds disappeared." Abeniola's heartbeat slowed. Her instincts sharpened instantly. The first woman whispered again, "Do you think the CEO knows?" "I doubt it," the other replied. "But nobody wants trouble." Footsteps approached, suddenly ending the conversation immediately. The women returned to their work as if nothing happened. But Abeniola had already heard enough. That evening, she remained longer than usual, pretending to organize cleaning supplies near the administrative records room. Eventually, most employees left. The hallways became quiet. Carefully, Abeniola glanced around before approaching a stack of printed financial summaries left near a desk. She was not searching for gossip anymore. Now, she was searching for truth. Slowly, she examined several documents. Her eyes widened. Large amounts of money assigned for employee welfare programs had been redirected repeatedly into vague operational restructuring expenses. Overtime payments showed inconsistencies. Medical assistance funds were incomplete, and nearly every approval signature belonged to Tunde Balogun. Abeniola felt coldness spread through her chest. The cruelty inside the company was not accidental. It was profitable. Workers were suffering while somebody enriched himself behind polished reports and expensive suits. Suddenly, footsteps echoed nearby. Abeniola quickly returned the papers and resumed cleaning just before a supervisor entered the hallway. "You are still here?" the woman asked. "Yes," Abeniola replied calmly. The office was dusty. The supervisor nodded tiredly before continuing past her. Abeniola lowered her head again, but inside her heart, something had changed permanently. Before entering the company, she believed Tunde was simply arrogant and cruel. Now she understood the truth was much darker. He was using fear to hide corruption. And her son, the billionaire CEO praised across Africa, had absolutely no idea what was happening beneath him. As Abeniola slowly pushed her cleaning cart through the silent executive hallway, she looked once more at the giant company logo shining proudly on the wall. Okonkwo Global Holdings, a company built from sacrifice, a company now rotting quietly from within. And for the first time since beginning her secret mission, Abeniola realized something frightening. The greatest danger inside the building was not Tunde's insults. It was the fact that too many people had become comfortable watching suffering in silence. By the second week of Abeniola's secret job, the atmosphere inside Okonkwo Global Holdings had become even heavier. Workers moved through the building carefully, like people walking across thin ice. Nobody trusted the walls anymore. Nobody trusted management. Employees smiled in meetings and whispered in elevators. Fear had become part of the company culture, as common as coffee cups and computer screens. And at the center of that fear stood Tunde Balogun. Every morning, he entered the building like a man inspecting property he personally owned. His expensive suits changed daily. His shoes shined perfectly. His assistants followed him everywhere carrying files and tablets, while workers immediately straightened their posture the moment he appeared. To senior executives, Tunde looked efficient. To ordinary workers, he looked dangerous. That Wednesday morning, Abeniola arrived earlier than usual and found Nkechi sitting quietly behind the reception desk before office hours officially began. The young receptionist looked exhausted. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes, and her usual warm smile seemed weaker. "You did not sleep well," Abeniola said gently, while arranging flowers near the lobby entrance. Nkechi forced a small laugh. "Is it that obvious?" A mother's eyes notice many things. For a moment, Nkechi looked down at the reception computer before speaking softly. "My landlord locked the water supply yesterday." Abeniola's heart tightened. "Why, I still owe rent." Nkechi swallowed hard. "My brother called from university last night, too. He may lose his exams if I cannot send money this week." The older woman listened quietly. Lagos was full of people like Nkechi, young men and women carrying entire families on tired shoulders while pretending everything was fine. "You are carrying too much alone," Abeniola said. Nkechi smiled sadly. "There is nobody else." Before Abeniola could answer, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the lobby. Tunde. Instantly, Nkechi straightened herself professionally and adjusted her blouse. Tunde walked toward reception while checking messages on his phone. "Nkechi," he said without looking up. "Yes, sir. Why is yesterday's visitor report not on my desk?" "I emailed it last night, sir." "Then print another copy." "Yes, sir." Tunde finally lifted his eyes and noticed Abeniola polishing the nearby desk. His expression immediately changed with irritation. "You again." Abeniola lowered her head politely. "Good morning, sir." He glanced briefly at her shoes before shaking his head with visible disgust. "I truly do not understand how the cleaning contractor hires people who look like this." Nkechi's face tightened immediately. Abeniola remained calm. "I will work harder, sir." "That would be a miracle." He turned back toward Nkechi. "And stop chatting during work hours. Reception is not a village Yasip corner." "Yes, sir." After he walked away, silence settled heavily across the lobby. Nkechi stared after him angrily. One day she whispered quietly, "Someone will speak to him the same way he speaks to others." Abeniola smiled faintly while continuing her work. "My daughter Bitterness is a heavy thing to carry. But how do you stay calm? Nkechi asked. He humiliates you almost every day. Abeniola paused for a moment before answering softly. Because people who humiliate others are often trying to hide their own shame. Nkechi looked unconvinced. As the morning continued, the company grew busier. Executives prepared for an upcoming board review, while junior employees rushed through deadlines and meetings. Near noon, Abeniola entered one of the executive restrooms carrying fresh towels. As she cleaned quietly, she overheard two managers speaking near the sinks. Tunde is cutting more overtime payments, one said. He says the CEO wants lower operational costs. Do you think Chidi really knows what is happening downstairs? The second manager shrugged. Honestly, I do not think he cares anymore. The words struck Abeniola painfully, not because they were cruel, because they sounded believable. That afternoon, Tunde called an unexpected meeting for reception and support staff in a small conference room on the second floor. Abeniola stood near the back beside other cleaners, while Nkechi sat nervously near the front. Tunde entered, carrying a folder. I am becoming increasingly disappointed with this department, he announced coldly. Nobody spoke. He paced slowly across the room like a teacher searching for weak students. Professionalism inside this company is collapsing. Staff members are becoming too comfortable. His eyes landed directly on Nkechi, especially certain employees. The room became tense immediately. Nkechi sat perfectly still. Tunde opened the folder dramatically. Yesterday during office hours, our receptionist abandoned her station to socialize with cleaning staff. Several employees lowered their eyes. Nkechi spoke carefully. Sir, it was lunch break. Tunde smiled mockingly. And who gave you permission to decide how company time should be used? Silence. He continued walking slowly around the room. You people forget something important. Thousands of Nigerians are desperate for jobs. If you cannot maintain standards, replacements are easy to find. Fear spread visibly across several faces. Then Tunde stopped beside Nkechi's chair. Starting today, he announced, you are temporarily reassigned from front reception to internal document processing. Shock flashed across Nkechi's face. Sir, perhaps less public responsibility will help improve your discipline. Everyone in the room understood the truth immediately. This was punishment. Punishment for showing kindness to a cleaner. Nkechi swallowed hard. Sir, reception work is my primary role. And now your role has changed. The young woman's eyes filled with humiliation, but she fought hard not to cry publicly. Abeniola watched silently from the back of the room, while anger burned inside her chest. Tunde was not simply controlling employees anymore. He was teaching them that compassion carried consequences. After the meeting ended, workers exited quietly, avoiding eye contact with one another. Nobody wanted to be associated with trouble. In the hallway outside, Nkechi finally stopped walking and leaned against the wall heavily. I cannot afford this, she whispered shakily. Abeniola approached slowly. My daughter, they reduced my department allowance too, Nkechi interrupted softly. That means less salary. Tears filled her eyes despite her effort to remain strong. My brother depends on me. Abeniola placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. For what it is worth, she said quietly, you did nothing wrong. Nkechi laughed bitterly. In this company, That does not matter. For several moments, neither woman spoke. Employees continued passing through the hallway pretending not to notice them. Fear again. Always fear. Finally, Abeniola spoke softly. Listen to me carefully, Nkechi. Never let this place turn your heart cold. The younger woman looked exhausted. Kindness only brings suffering here. No, Abeniola replied gently. Cruel people bring suffering. Kindness simply reveals who they are. Nkechi wiped her eyes slowly. Abeniola continued, her voice calm and wise. When the world becomes harsh, many people believe survival requires becoming harsh too. But a person who loses compassion has already lost something greater than money. The younger woman stared at her quietly. You speak like someone who has survived many things. Abeniola smiled faintly. My daughter, poverty teaches lessons universities cannot. Far down the hallway, Tunde emerged from another meeting, laughing confidently with senior managers. The contrast felt painful. One person carried power without mercy. The other carried pain without bitterness. As Abeniola watched him disappear toward the executive elevators, she understood something important. Tunde believed fear made him strong, but true strength was standing in a cruel world without becoming cruel yourself. And despite everything happening inside Okonkwo Global Holdings, Nkechi had somehow managed to protect that part of herself, for now. The news spread through Okonkwo Global Holdings before sunrise. CEO is returning today. Employees whispered it in elevators, hallways, and break rooms like nervous students hearing about a school inspection. Receptionists adjusted their makeup more carefully. Managers reviewed reports repeatedly. Supervisors shouted instructions at cleaners and security guards. Whenever Chidi Okonkwo returned from international business trips, the entire company became tense. Not because he shouted often, but because his silence was harder to predict. That morning, heavy rain fell across Lagos while luxury cars lined the company entrance. Security guards stood straighter than usual beneath the covered driveway. Inside the building, cleaners polished every surface twice. Abeniola watched quietly from the lobby while mopping near the glass doors. Around her, fear moved like electricity. Tunde has been angry since 5 a.m., one cleaner whispered. He wants everything perfect before the CEO arrives. Abeniola remained silent, but inside her heart old memories stirred painfully. She remembered the younger Chidi, the boy who once waited outside her roadside food stand after school, carrying her cooking pots home without being asked. The boy who used to apologize if he accidentally spoke harshly to anyone. Now grown employees trembled at the thought of his arrival. That truth hurt her more deeply than she expected. Near 9 a.m., Tunde entered the lobby looking unusually tense. His suit was perfectly pressed, but impatience covered his face. Listen carefully, he announced sharply to nearby workers. Everyone stopped moving immediately. The CEO will arrive within the hour. I do not want mistakes, delays, noise, or embarrassment from anybody. His eyes swept across cleaners and reception staff like inspection lights. And for heaven's sake, he added, while staring briefly at Abeniola's shoes, try to look presentable today. Several workers lowered their heads uncomfortably. Nkechi, now reassigned to document processing, stood near a hallway carrying files. Abeniola noticed how much sadder she looked after her demotion. The warmth in her expression had faded beneath exhaustion and quiet humiliation. Still, when their eyes met, Nkechi offered her a small smile. That alone touched Abeniola deeply. Even wounded people sometimes still choose kindness. At exactly 10:15 a.m., the lobby doors opened. Instantly, silence spread through the building. 3 bodyguards entered first, followed by senior executives. Then Chidi Okonkwo walked through the revolving doors wearing a dark, tailored suit and carrying the calm authority of a man used to controlling rooms without raising his voice. Employees straightened immediately. "Good morning, sir." "Welcome back, sir." Chidi nodded politely while continuing forward. Abeniola watched him carefully from behind her cleaning cart. For a brief second, emotion tightened inside her chest. No matter how distant he had become, he was still her son. Still the boy she once carried on tired shoulders through crowded markets. Still the child she prayed over during nights when hunger lived inside their home. But Chidi did not recognize her. Not in the faded uniform, not with the headscarf, not while she stood quietly among invisible workers. As he passed through the lobby, executives surrounded him immediately with reports, schedules, and updates. "Your Johannesburg meeting was successful, sir." "Yes. The board presentation is prepared." "Good." "Investors from Kenya requested another meeting next month." Chidi listened calmly while walking toward the elevators. Then something interrupted him. A loud voice echoed from the reception area nearby. It was Tunde. "Are you blind?" he snapped angrily. Everyone turned. A young office assistant had accidentally dropped several folders across the floor while hurrying past reception. Papers scattered everywhere. The assistant looked terrified. "I am sorry, sir. You people create problems from simple tasks." The young man quickly knelt to gather documents, while employees nearby pretended not to watch. Abeniola looked toward Chidi instinctively. For the first time that morning, the billionaire CEO seemed distracted. His eyes remained on the frightened assistant for several seconds longer than expected. Something about the scene unsettled him. Tunde noticed immediately and forced a laugh. "These junior workers need discipline, sir," he said confidently. "Otherwise standards collapse." Chidi said nothing, but Abeniola saw a flicker of discomfort cross his face before he entered the elevator. The doors closed. The lobby slowly breathed again. Tunde straightened proudly after the CEO disappeared upstairs, clearly believing he had handled the situation correctly. But Abeniola noticed something important. For the first time, Chidi looked uncertain. Later that afternoon, Abeniola cleaned the executive floor, while Chidi attended meetings inside the boardroom nearby. Through partially open doors, she occasionally heard fragments of conversation. Quarterly profits exceeded expectations. Operational costs are down. Efficiency improvements continue under Tunde's supervision. Executives sounded pleased. But while cleaning nearby offices, Abeniola saw truths hidden behind those polished reports. She saw junior staff eating instant noodles quietly at desks because they could not afford cafeteria meals anymore. She saw an exhausted assistant secretly massaging swollen wrists after hours of nonstop typing. She saw workers afraid to leave before management even after completing assignments. Numbers looked beautiful. People did not. Around evening, after the board meeting ended, Chidi finally stepped away from executives and walked alone toward his office. As he passed through the hallway, he noticed Abeniola struggling slightly with a heavy bucket near the conference room entrance. Without thinking, he stopped. For one brief second, mother and son stood only a few feet apart. "Careful," Chidi said automatically. His voice was calm but distant, the way wealthy people often spoke politely to workers they barely noticed. Abeniola lowered her eyes immediately. "Thank you, sir." Chidi gave a small nod and continued walking. But after several steps, he slowed slightly. Something about her voice felt strangely familiar. He glanced back once. Abeniola kept her head lowered while wiping water from the floor. Chidi frowned faintly before continuing toward his office. Inside her chest, Abeniola's heart ached. Her own son had stood beside her without recognition. Yet strangely, she did not blame him completely. Power changes vision. The wealthy often stop truly seeing people. Society labels unimportant. That night, Chidi remained in the office later than usual, reviewing reports alone. Outside his glass office walls, Lagos glittered beneath darkness. But his mind kept drifting unexpectedly back toward the frightened office assistant from earlier. Then toward the older cleaner with worn shoes. Something about the atmosphere inside the company felt heavier than he remembered. Even the employees smiled differently now. Not naturally, carefully, as if constantly afraid. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." Tunde entered confidently, carrying updated operational reports. "Everything went smoothly today, sir," he announced proudly. "The staff performed well under supervision." Chidi studied him quietly. "Tunde," he said after a pause, "have there been complaints recently from lower staff?" The operations manager barely reacted. "Nothing unusual, sir. Minor issues only. You know how workers can be sometimes." Chidi leaned back slightly. "They seem nervous." Tunde smiled, professionally. "Discipline creates structure. Structure creates success." For several moments, silence filled the office. Then Tunde added casually, "One older cleaner has been slightly problematic, though. The woman looks unprofessional and distracts people constantly." A cold feeling moved through Abeniola's son without explanation. "The cleaner with the old shoes?" Chidi asked. Tunde laughed lightly. "Exactly." Something about the laughter irritated him unexpectedly. "She is harmless," Chidi said quietly. Tunde nodded quickly. "Of course, sir. I simply believe image matters." After Tunde left the office, Chidi remained seated alone, staring out across Lagos. Below him, thousands of ordinary people still struggled through traffic, poverty, and survival, exactly the way his mother once had. Slowly, an uncomfortable thought entered his mind. When had he stopped paying attention to the people beneath him? 3 days after Chidi's return, Tunde announced a major internal inspection. The news spread through Okonkwo Global Holdings like approaching thunder. Department heads rushed through hallways carrying folders. Receptionists practiced greetings repeatedly. Supervisors barked instructions at cleaners and junior staff. Every floor suddenly became obsessed with appearances. Not truth. Appearances. Tunde personally supervised preparations from early morning until late evening, determined to impress Chidi during the inspection tour. "The CEO must see excellence," he repeated constantly. But Abeniola understood the deeper meaning behind his words. The CEO must not see reality. On the morning of the inspection, the company lobby looked almost unnaturally perfect. Fresh flowers decorated the reception area. Every glass surface reflected light without a single fingerprint. Even the security guards received new gloves and polished name badges. Abeniola arrived before sunrise carrying her mop and cleaning supplies. Her old black shoes squeaked slightly against the polished marble as she worked quietly near the entrance. Nearby workers moved nervously. One cleaner whispered Tunde fired someone after the last inspection. Another replied, "Today will be worse because the CEO is personally attending." Fear again. Always fear. Around 9 a.m., Tunde entered the lobby wearing an expensive cream-colored suit. Two assistant managers followed closely behind him carrying inspection documents. His eyes immediately scanned the floor. "Why is this section still wet?" he snapped. A young cleaner hurried forward. "Sir, we just finished polishing." "I did not ask for excuses." The cleaner lowered her head instantly. Tunde's gaze moved across the lobby until it stopped on Abeniola. "You!" he called sharply. Abeniola approached calmly. "Yes, sir. You will remain in the main lobby during the inspection." Several workers exchanged nervous glances. The main lobby was the most visible area in the building. One mistake there would happen directly in front of executives and visiting partners. "Yes, sir," Abeniola replied softly. Tunde stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly. "And try not to embarrass the company today." His eyes drifted briefly toward her worn shoes. Abeniola felt the insult without him needing to say more. By late morning, executives from several branches arrived alongside foreign business guests invited to observe company operations. Expensive cars lined the entrance outside, while photographers captured images near the company logo. Inside employees smiled so carefully that it almost looked painful. At exactly 11 a.m., Chidi entered the lobby with senior executives surrounding him. Tunde immediately straightened with visible pride. "Welcome, sir," he said confidently. "Everything is prepared." Chidi nodded calmly while glancing around the building. Something still felt strange to him. The company looked successful, but not alive. Every smile appeared rehearsed. Every conversation sounded cautious. Workers behaved like people trying not to attract punishment rather than people proud of their work. As executives guided Chidi through departments, Abeniola continued mopping near the center of the lobby, quietly observing everything. Then she noticed Tunde watching her, not casually, carefully. The look unsettled her immediately. Several minutes later, a group of international investors entered through the main doors, laughing loudly beside Tunde. Cameras flashed. Executives smiled. At that exact moment, Tunde suddenly changed direction and walked directly toward Abeniola, carrying a cup of coffee. "Move faster," he muttered sharply as he passed. Before she could respond, his expensive shoe deliberately struck the side of her cleaning bucket. The bucket tipped violently. Dirty water splashed across the marble floor near the investors. Several people gasped. One woman jumped backward to protect her shoes. The lobby froze. For half a second, silence covered the room. Then Tunde exploded with anger. "What is wrong? What's wrong with you?" he shouted loudly enough for everyone to hear. Abeniola stared at the overturned bucket in shock. She knew exactly what happened. He kicked it intentionally. But before she could speak, Tunde continued loudly. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is?" All eyes turned toward her. The old cleaner standing beside spilled dirty water, the perfect target for humiliation. "I'm sorry, sir," Abeniola said quietly. "You are always sorry," Tunde snapped. Can you not do one simple job correctly? Nearby employees lowered their eyes immediately. Nobody spoke, not even though several workers had clearly seen Tunde kick the bucket himself. Fear silenced truth again. One investor awkwardly cleared his throat, while another stepped around the water carefully. Tunde turned toward them with embarrassed laughter. I apologize, he said smoothly. Some staff members struggle with professionalism. Then he looked back at Abeniola with cold irritation. Clean this immediately. The old woman slowly knelt on the marble floor beside the spreading dirty water. Her knees hurt sharply against the hard surface. Around her stood executives, investors, managers, and employees pretending not to see what was truly happening. Humiliation had become performance. As Abeniola reached for towels, someone suddenly knelt beside her. Nkechi. Though reassigned from reception, she had been carrying documents through the lobby when the incident happened. Without hesitation, she began helping wipe the floor. Tunde's expression darkened instantly. What are you doing? He demanded. Nkechi looked up calmly. Helping clean, sir. I did not assign you cleaning duties. She cannot clean this alone. Several nearby workers looked horrified that Nkechi dared respond at all. Tunde stepped closer. You seem very committed to defending this woman. Nkechi swallowed hard, but remained kneeling beside Abeniola. She did not spill the bucket herself. The entire lobby became silent. Abeniola's heart tightened immediately. Dangerous words. Tunde stared at her coldly. What exactly are you implying? Nkechi hesitated. Fear flickered visibly across her face. Around them stood powerful executives, wealthy investors, and frightened employees, pretending to organize papers while secretly listening. Abeniola wanted to stop her, but before she could speak, Nkechi quietly answered, I am saying accidents happen. Tunde understood the challenge hidden beneath the sentence. His jaw tightened. You are becoming very bold for someone already under disciplinary review. Nkechi lowered her eyes immediately. I apologize, sir. For several seconds, tension hung heavily in the lobby. Then Chidi's voice interrupted unexpectedly from behind them. What happened here? Everyone turned instantly. The CEO had returned from the executive tour earlier than expected and now stood only a few feet away beside two board members. Tunde recovered quickly. Minor cleaning issue, sir, he answered smoothly. Nothing serious. Chidi looked down. He saw the dirty water. The kneeling older cleaner with worn shoes, and beside her, the frightened young employee helping silently. Something about the image unsettled him deeply. Not because of the accident itself, because nobody else had moved to help. The lobby was full of people. Yet only one employee knelt beside the cleaner. Chidi studied the scene quietly. Then his eyes briefly met Abeniola's again. This time, the strange feeling inside him grew stronger. Familiar. Painfully familiar. But before he could understand why, Tunde spoke again. We will handle it immediately, sir. Chidi looked toward him slowly. For the first time since returning to Lagos, a trace of coldness entered his voice. Make sure you do. The sentence sounded simple, but Tunde suddenly felt uneasy. After Chidi walked away with the executives, the atmosphere inside the lobby changed slightly. Not safer, but uncertain. Tunde stared at Abeniola and Nkechi with visible irritation before lowering his voice sharply. Both of you report to my office later. Fear crossed Nkechi's face instantly. Abeniola remained calm outwardly, though sadness moved quietly through her chest. The inspection continued. Executives smiled. Investors praised efficiency. Photographers captured polished images for company publicity. But while cameras focused on success, Abeniola understood the deeper truth hidden beneath the marble floors and expensive suits. A company willing to humiliate the weakest worker in public was already spiritually broken. And somewhere inside that same building, her son was slowly beginning to see the cracks himself. By evening, the entire company had already heard about the incident in the lobby. In offices, elevators, and break rooms, employees whispered carefully about the spilled bucket and Tunde's public humiliation of the old cleaner. Most people avoided speaking too loudly. At Okonkwo Global Holdings, truth traveled quietly because fear was always listening. Abeniola spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning in silence while executives completed the inspection tour upstairs. Her knees still ached from kneeling on the marble floor, but the physical pain did not trouble her as much as the silence around her. Dozens of people had watched what happened. Only one person helped, Nkechi. That truth remained heavy inside her heart. Near 5 p.m., a junior supervisor approached with a clipboard. "Mama Benny," she said awkwardly, "Tunde wants you in his office." Several nearby cleaners immediately lowered their eyes. Nobody ever entered Tunde's office comfortably. Abeniola nodded calmly and followed the supervisor upstairs. The executive hallway smelled faintly of expensive cologne and polished wood. Through glass walls, Lagos glowed beneath the orange light of sunset. Wealth surrounded every corner of the building, but peace did not. When Abeniola entered Tunde's office, he sat behind a large mahogany desk reviewing documents. He did not look up immediately. The silence itself was part of his performance. Finally, he removed his glasses slowly. "Do you understand the embarrassment you caused today?" Abeniola stood quietly near the door. "I apologize, sir." "That does not remove the damage." His voice remained calm but cruel. "We had foreign investors visiting. The CEO was present. And you spilled dirty water in the middle of the lobby like an amateur." Abeniola looked at him steadily. "You kicked the bucket." The words shocked even Tunde for a moment. Silence filled the office instantly. Then he leaned back slowly and smiled. A dangerous accusation from a cleaner. "It is the truth." Tunde's smile disappeared. For the first time, open hostility entered his eyes. "You should be careful, Mama Benny. Old people who create trouble rarely survive long in companies like this." Abeniola did not respond. Tunde opened a file dramatically. "As punishment for today's incident, your salary will be reduced this month." Her chest tightened slightly. That salary barely covered transportation and food. Still, she remained calm. "Yes, sir?" Tunde looked disappointed by her composure. He wanted tears, fear, begging. Instead, the old woman simply stood quietly in front of him, with dignity still resting in her eyes. "Also," he continued coldly, "you will personally apologize to the evening cleaning staff before leaving today." Abeniola stared at him carefully. "Why?" "Because your incompetence created extra work." Again, humiliation disguised as discipline. After a long silence, she answered softly, "If apologizing will give others peace, I will do it." Tunde frowned slightly. He hated her calmness. Most workers broke under pressure eventually. They cried, argued, panicked, or begged. But somehow this old cleaner continued carrying humiliation without losing herself. That unsettled him more than he admitted. "You may go," he said sharply. As Abeniola turned toward the door, Tunde spoke again. "And tell your little friend Nkechi to stop defending you. She is already one mistake away from unemployment." The warning stayed in Abeniola's chest long after she left the office. Downstairs, evening workers prepared for night cleaning, while tired employees slowly exited the building. Rain tapped softly against the glass walls outside. Near the service hallway, several cleaners gathered quietly after hearing about Abeniola's punishment. The old woman stood before them calmly. "I am sorry for the extra work today," she said gently. Most of the workers looked uncomfortable. Nobody believed the spill was truly her fault, but nobody dared say it openly either. One older cleaner finally spoke softly. "It was not your fault, Mama." Another worker immediately glanced around nervously. "Be careful," she whispered. "Fear again. Always fear." After the others left, Nkechi approached, carrying a stack of files against her chest. "I heard he deducted your salary," she said quietly. Abeniola smiled faintly. "Money comes and goes. That is easy to say when rent is not chasing you." The older woman looked at her carefully. Nkechi's face showed exhaustion deeper than physical tiredness now. Stress had settled behind her eyes permanently. "You have not eaten today?" Abeniola observed. Nkechi laughed weakly. "How did you know?" "A mother notices." They sat together near the back staircase again, while the building slowly emptied around them. Nkechi removed a small plastic container from her bag holding plain rice with almost no stew. Without hesitation, she divided it again. My daughter Abeniola protested softly. "You already have little." "So do you." The older woman accepted quietly. For several moments they ate in silence while distant thunder rolled outside. Finally, Nkechi spoke. "Why are you still calm after everything today?" Abeniola looked down at the rice container in her hands. "Because anger is expensive." Nkechi frowned slightly. The older woman continued gently. "When I was younger, life humiliated me many times. There were days people insulted me because I sold food beside the roadside. Some customers threw money at me like I was not human." Pain flickered briefly through her eyes as old memories returned. "At first, I carried anger everywhere, but eventually I realized something important. What if cruel people can turn your heart cruel too? Then they have stolen more than your peace." Nkechi listened quietly. Abeniola smiled faintly. "Never allow bitterness to become your identity." For several seconds, only rain filled the silence around them. Then Nkechi whispered softly, "Sometimes I feel invisible in this company." The sentence pierced Abeniola deeply, because invisibility was exactly how powerful systems survived. People stopped seeing cleaners, guards, assistants, receptionists, as if poverty erased humanity itself. The older woman reached gently for Nkechi's hand. "My daughter, invisible people are often the ones carrying the world." Nkechi's eyes filled slightly with emotion. Upstairs, lights still glowed inside executive offices where wealthy men discussed profits and expansion plans. Downstairs, two underpaid women shared plain rice beside a staircase. One carried hidden power, the other carried hidden pain. Yet in that moment, They understood each other more honestly than most people inside the company ever would. Before leaving, Nkechi suddenly asked quietly, Mama Benny, why do you stay here? The question lingered heavily between them. Abeniola looked toward the dark hallway thoughtfully. Because my son built this place. Because something precious inside him is getting lost. Because people are suffering while nobody important sees them. But he could not say any of that. Instead, she answered softly, sometimes God places people inside darkness so they can carry light where it disappeared. And Nkechi stared at her silently, then slowly, despite exhaustion and fear, a small smile returned to her face. As they stood to leave the building together, rain continued falling heavily across Lagos outside. And deep inside her heart, Abeniola made another quiet promise. She would endure humiliation a little longer, because truth was getting closer now. She could feel it. Even her son was beginning to notice the cracks beneath the polished surface of his empire. Tunde Balogun stopped underestimating Abeniola after the lobby incident. At first, he dismissed her as just another poor cleaner, old, invisible, powerless. But something about her unsettled him now. She never begged, never panicked, never broke. Most workers feared humiliation because humiliation controlled them. But somehow, this old woman carried shame differently. Tunde insulted her publicly, reduced her salary, mocked her shoes, yet she continued walking through the company with quiet dignity intact. That disturbed him more than anger ever could. And worse, Chidi had started noticing things. Small things. Dangerous things. Twice in the same week, the CEO asked questions about employee welfare during meetings. Once he requested updated overtime reports personally instead of allowing management summaries. Tunde recognized the warning signs immediately. The atmosphere inside the company was shifting. So he decided to remove the problem before it grew larger. On Thursday morning, heavy humidity covered Lagos, while dark clouds gathered above the city. Inside Okonkwo Global Holdings, employees moved through another tense workday beneath bright office lights and hidden exhaustion. Abeniola arrived early as usual. Near the service hallway, she found Nkechi quietly reviewing documents before work officially began. You came earlier than me today, Abeniola said gently. Nkechi smiled weakly. Could not sleep. The older woman noticed fresh worry in her face. What happened? My brother called last night. Nkechi lowered her eyes. His university gave him 1 week to pay remaining fees. Pain sat heavily inside every word. How much Nkechi mentioned the amount softly. To wealthy executives upstairs, it was insignificant. To someone surviving on reduced salary, it felt impossible. Abeniola touched her arm gently. Do not lose hope. Nkechi laughed quietly. Hope does not pay universities in Lagos. Before Abeniola could answer, a cleaner rushed nervously into the hallway. Mama Benny, she whispered urgently. Tunde is asking for you. The older woman frowned slightly. So early. She followed the cleaner upstairs toward the administrative floor. The building still felt unusually quiet because most executives had not arrived yet. When Abeniola entered Tunde's office, she immediately sensed something different. He was smiling. That alone felt dangerous. Good morning, he said smoothly. Abeniola remained cautious. Good morning, sir. Tunde leaned back comfortably in his chair. You have worked here several weeks now. Yes, sir. And despite certain incidents, management has been patient with you. The older woman said nothing. Tunde opened a drawer slowly and removed an envelope. I believe honesty is very important in companies, he continued casually. Abeniola's instincts sharpened immediately. Something was wrong. Tunde stood and walked toward a storage cabinet near the wall. This cabinet belongs to cleaning staff temporarily assigned to executive floors. Correct. Yes, sir. He opened it briefly, pretended to check something inside, then shut it again. Good, he said calmly. You may leave. The entire conversation felt strange. Too short. Too controlled. Abeniola walked out slowly, unease following her down the hallway. An hour later, the trap closed. Around mid-morning, security guards suddenly entered the janitorial storage area while several cleaners organized supplies. Everyone froze. What happened? One worker whispered nervously. The lead guard looked uncomfortable. We received a report about missing money. Silence filled the room instantly. Tunde entered moments later with two supervisors behind him. His expression carried perfectly performed disappointment. This is unfortunate, he announced loudly. Abeniola immediately understood. The envelope. Nearby cleaners exchanged frightened glances while the guards began checking lockers and cabinets. Nobody protested. People with power always sounded convincing first. One guard eventually opened the temporary cabinet Tunde mentioned earlier. Inside sat a thick brown envelope. The guard removed it slowly. There is cash inside, he said quietly. Several workers gasped. Tunde shook his head dramatically. Open it! The guard counted quickly before looking stunned. It is company money. Tunde sighed heavily like a man betrayed. This was meant for executive hospitality expenses. Then his eyes moved slowly toward Abeniola. Whose cabinet was this silence? Every worker knew. The guard answered reluctantly. Mama Benny's temporary storage cabinet. Fear spread instantly across the room. Several cleaners stepped slightly away from Abeniola without realizing it. Poverty teaches people survival first. Association with accusations becomes dangerous. Abeniola stood perfectly still. Tunde stared at her coldly. Do you want to explain this? The older woman looked directly at him for the first time in days. You placed it there. Shock flickered briefly across several faces. Tunde laughed softly in disbelief. So now I planted stolen money too. It is the truth. The room became painfully tense. The security guards looked uncomfortable. Supervisors avoided eye contact completely. Tunde stepped closer slowly. You are accusing a senior executive of corruption. I am accusing you of dishonesty. For a brief moment, hatred flashed openly across Tunde's face before he controlled it again. You people always make yourselves victims, he said coldly. First incompetence, then excuses, now lies. Abeniola's chest tightened with sadness. Not for herself, for the company. Because too many people inside this building already seem prepared to believe the worst about poor workers automatically. One supervisor finally whispered nervously, maybe we should report this quietly. No, Tunde interrupted sharply. His eyes gleamed with cruel opportunity. This kind of behavior must be handled publicly. Staff need to understand consequences. Abeniola immediately understood his intention. Humiliation again. Always humiliation. Within minutes, workers across multiple departments heard rumors spreading through the building. The old cleaner stole money. They found cash in her locker. She has been pretending to be innocent. Fear and gossip traveled faster than truth. Soon security escorted Abeniola toward the main lobby while employees secretly watched from hallways and glass offices. Nobody openly defended her, not because everyone believed she was guilty, because fear had trained them to protect themselves first. Near reception, Nkechi saw the scene unfolding and immediately rushed forward. "What happened?" she demanded. Tunde answered loudly enough for nearby workers to hear. "Your friend has been stealing company funds." Nkechi looked shocked. "That is impossible. The evidence says otherwise." "She would never." Careful Tunde warned coldly. "Defending misconduct can damage your career permanently." But Nkechi ignored him. She turned toward Abeniola instead. "Mama, tell them the truth." Abeniola looked at the younger woman sadly. "I already did." Several employees gathered quietly around the lobby, pretending to work while secretly watching everything. Tunde noticed the attention and seemed almost pleased. Public humiliation strengthened fear inside organizations. That was his favorite management tool. "You disappoint me," he told Abeniola loudly. "After all the patience this company showed you." Patience. The word almost made her heart ache. Mockery disguised as mercy. Abeniola looked around the lobby slowly. The marble floors, the expensive lighting, the nervous employees pretending not to stare. Everything inside the company suddenly felt spiritually exhausted. Then her eyes landed briefly on the large digital portrait of Chidi displayed near the entrance. Her son smiled confidently from the screen beside words about leadership and integrity. Pain moved quietly through her chest. If only he truly knew what was happening beneath his own name. Tunde folded his arms proudly. "You should consider yourself lucky police are not involved yet." Nkechi stepped forward immediately. "This is wrong." "Enough," Tunde snapped. The entire lobby fell silent. Then he pointed toward Abeniola's old shoes again. "I should have known from the beginning," he said cruelly. "People who arrive looking like beggars eventually behave like criminals." The insult landed heavily across the room. Some workers lowered their heads in shame. Others looked away completely. But Abeniola remained standing calmly, despite humiliation burning all around her. And deep inside her heart, one painful realization became clear. The company had become so used to humiliating the weak that cruelty no longer shocked anyone. That was the true sickness spreading through Okonkwo Global Holdings. Not stolen money, lost humanity. By the next morning, the story had already spread across the entire company. The old cleaner stole company money. Employees whispered it inside elevators and break rooms while pretending not to gossip. Some believed it immediately. Others doubted the accusation, but stayed silent anyway. At Okonkwo Global Holdings, silence had become survival. Abeniola arrived early as usual despite everything that happened the previous day. She wore the same faded uniform, the same headscarf, and the same cracked black shoes Tunde loved mocking. But something inside the building had changed. Workers stared at her differently now. Some looked suspicious, some looked sympathetic, most looked afraid to interact with her at all. Near the service hallway, one cleaner quietly moved away when Abeniola approached. Another avoided eye contact completely. Humiliation isolates people faster than prison walls. Only Nkechi still walked toward her without fear. I barely slept. The younger woman admitted softly. People are talking everywhere. Abeniola gave a tired smile. People often believe the worst about poor people quickly. You know I do not believe them. I know. Nkechi lowered her voice carefully. What will happen now? Before Abeniola could answer, a supervisor rushed toward them nervously. Tunde wants everyone downstairs immediately. Fear spread instantly across nearby workers. Public confrontation again. As employees gathered near the main lobby, tension filled the air. Receptionists stood stiffly behind their desks, while junior staff pretended to organize files nearby just to watch what would happen. At the center of the lobby stood Tunde Balogun, wearing another expensive suit and carrying himself with the confidence of a man who believed power protected him from consequences. Beside him stood two security guards. Abeniola immediately understood. He wanted another public humiliation. The older woman walked calmly into the center of the lobby while whispers moved around her. That is the cleaner. They found money in her cabinet. She looked suspicious from the beginning. Tunde folded his arms dramatically once the crowd became large enough. I called everyone here because integrity matters inside this company, he announced loudly. Several employees lowered their heads. Nobody wanted to meet his eyes. We cannot build a world-class organization while tolerating theft. Abeniola stood silently while workers stared at her. Nkechi remained near the back of the crowd, gripping documents tightly against her chest. Tunde turned toward Abeniola with fake disappointment. You had many opportunities to admit the truth privately. The truth is already known, she replied calmly. He smiled coldly. Then admit it. I did not steal anything. The lobby became quiet again. Tunde walked slowly around her like a prosecutor performing for an audience. Interesting, he said, because company money was discovered inside your cabinet. You placed it there. Several employees exchanged nervous glances immediately. Tunde laughed loudly. Still accusing me. You know what you did. For one brief moment, anger flashed behind Tunde's polished smile. Then he regained control. This is why some people remain poor forever, he announced loudly. No accountability, only excuses. The insult landed heavily across the lobby. Abeniola felt pain rise quietly inside her chest, but not because of herself. Because so many workers listening to him had spent their entire lives struggling against poverty already. Tunde pointed directly at her worn shoes. From the day you entered this building, you brought embarrassment with you. Several workers looked uncomfortable immediately, but nobody interrupted him. You walk around this company looking like a street beggar? He continued cruelly. Now everybody understands why. Nkechi finally stepped forward. That is enough. The entire lobby froze. Tunde turned slowly toward her. What did you say? Nkechi's voice trembled slightly, but she forced herself to continue. She does not deserve this. Tunde stared at her in disbelief. You are defending a thief. I am defending a human being. Several employees looked shocked. Nobody challenged Tunde publicly. Nobody. His expression darkened immediately. You are becoming very foolish, Nkechi. The young woman swallowed hard, but did not step back. She never stole anything. And how would you know? Because she has more dignity than most people in this building. The sentence struck the room like thunder. Fear flashed across multiple faces instantly. Tunde's jaw tightened. You should remember your position. Nkechi looked directly at him now. And you should remember yours. A collective silence swept through the lobby. Even the security guards looked nervous. Tunde stepped closer slowly. Careful, he warned quietly. You already lost your department. Do not lose your career too. But something had changed inside Nkechi. Weeks of humiliation, exhaustion, and fear were finally colliding with anger. She shared food with workers when she barely had enough herself. Nkechi said loudly, she comforted people you humiliated. She treated everyone kindly, while this company treated her like garbage. Several employees lowered their eyes in shame because they knew it was true. Tunde laughed harshly. So now, we celebrate poor behavior because it looks humble. No, Nkechi replied. We celebrate humanity. For one dangerous second, it looked like Tunde might completely lose his temper. Then suddenly, a soft electronic sound interrupted the tension. The glass elevator doors behind the crowd opened. Silence spread instantly across the lobby. Chidi Okonkwo stepped out. Two executives followed behind him carrying folders, but they immediately sensed the tension in the room. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed comfortably. Chidi looked across the gathered employees slowly. What is happening here? Tunde recovered first. Minor disciplinary matter, sir. But Chidi's eyes had already landed on Abeniola standing beside the security guards, then on Nkechi, then on the crowd watching silently. Something felt deeply wrong. He stepped closer. What disciplinary matter? Tunde answered smoothly. The cleaner stole company money. We are handling the situation professionally. Chidi studied Abeniola carefully. For some reason, seeing her standing there publicly humiliated disturbed him more than he could explain. Then Tunde spoke again. These situations happen when companies become too lenient with low-level staff. Chidi's expression hardened slightly. Still, he said nothing. Tunde continued, confidently encouraged by the silence. Frankly, sir, I noticed problems with her from the beginning. Even her appearance reflects poor standards. His eyes moved toward Abeniola's shoes again. She walks into a global company looking like a homeless street woman. The words echoed across the marble lobby. And in that exact moment, Chidi felt something inside him shift violently. Because suddenly, without warning, a memory hit him. Rain. A roadside food stall. His mother standing in worn black shoes while serving customers late into the night. Those same shoes. The same tired dignity. His heartbeat slowed. Slowly, Chidi looked down again at Abeniola's face. At the eyes he somehow never truly examined before. At the quiet strength inside them. And for the first time since she entered the company, recognition began moving through him like shock. The lobby remained silent. Tunde kept speaking, unaware of what was happening beside him. People like this destroy company image. Enough. Chidi's voice cut sharply through the room. Instant silence followed. Tunde stopped immediately, confused by the sudden coldness in the CEO's tone. Chidi stared at Abeniola with growing disbelief. The older woman lowered her eyes quietly. Pain filled his chest, because deep down, before his mind fully accepted it, his heart already knew. The woman standing humiliated in front of the entire company was his mother. The lobby remained completely silent after Chidi said the word enough. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even Tunde looked confused by the sudden sharpness in the CEO's voice. Chidi stood still near the elevator, staring at Abeniola as if the world around him had disappeared. His chest felt tight. His heartbeat sounded louder than the whispers fading through the lobby. The shoes. He could not stop looking at the shoes. Cracked black leather. Worn soles. The exact kind his mother wore years ago while standing beside smoky roadside cooking pots during rainy nights in Enugu. Slowly, painfully, memories returned. Abeniola standing in floodwater, selling food. Abeniola walking home exhausted after midnight. Abeniola smiling through hunger so her son would not feel guilty for eating. And now, those same eyes stood in front of him again beneath a cleaner's headscarf. Humiliated, accused, mocked publicly inside his own company. Chidi felt sick. Tunde cleared his throat carefully, trying to regain control of the situation. "Sir," he said cautiously, "this cleaner was caught stealing company funds." But Chidi barely heard him. His eyes remained fixed on Abeniola. The older woman lowered her gaze quietly, almost as if protecting him from the full shame of the moment. That hurt even more. Finally, Chidi spoke. "What is your full name?" The question shocked the lobby. Tunde frowned slightly. Nkechi looked confused. Several employees exchanged nervous glances. Abeniola answered softly, "Benny, sir. Not a lie. But not the full truth either." Chidi stared at her for another long moment. Then slowly he turned toward Tunde. "Bring all security footage related to this accusation." Tunde blinked. "Sir, all footage," Chidi repeated coldly. "Immediately." Something dangerous moved behind his calm voice now. For the first time since becoming CEO, employees nearby saw anger beneath his control. Tunde forced a professional smile quickly. "Of course, sir. But the evidence is already clear." Chidi's eyes hardened. "I did not ask for your conclusion." Silence. Tunde swallowed carefully. "Yes, sir." Within minutes, tension spread through the building again. Employees whispered nervously while IT staff rushed toward the security office upstairs. Managers suddenly avoided Tunde's eyes. Something no longer felt safe. Chidi remained in the lobby the entire time. That alone shocked everyone. Normally, the billionaire CEO would delegate situations like this immediately. But now he stood there personally while Abeniola remained beside the security guards. Nkechi slowly approached her again. "Are you all right?" she whispered. Abeniola smiled faintly despite everything. "God is still watching." The younger woman nearly cried, hearing the calmness in her voice. Across the lobby, Tunde kept checking his phone nervously while pretending confidence. Sweat gathered slightly near his forehead, despite the cold air conditioning. Something was going wrong. 20 minutes later, the head of security finally arrived carrying a tablet. "Sir," he said carefully to Chidi, "we recovered footage from the administrative hallway and janitorial storage section." "Play it." The lobby lights reflected across the tablet screen as several executives moved closer nervously. Employees watched from nearby hallways, pretending to work while secretly listening. The footage began. At first, it showed ordinary hallway activity. Then Tunde appeared on screen, entering the storage area earlier that morning. The entire lobby became still. Everyone watched silently as the operations manager opened Abeniola's cabinet, removed a brown envelope from inside his suit jacket, and placed it carefully among cleaning supplies before leaving. A sharp gasp escaped somewhere in the crowd. Nkechi covered her mouth with both hands. The security guards exchanged shocked looks immediately, and Tunde's face lost all color. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The evidence was undeniable. Chidi stared at the screen without blinking. His chest burned, not only because Tunde framed an innocent worker, but because his mother endured all this quietly inside a company carrying his own name. Finally, Chidi lifted his eyes slowly toward Tunde. The silence between them felt terrifying. "Explain this." Tunde opened his mouth, but nothing came out immediately. "Sir, I can explain." Then explain." His voice was colder now than anyone in the company had ever heard. Tunde's confidence completely collapsed. "It was a misunderstanding," he stammered weakly. "I only wanted to pressure her into confessing about other issues. You planted stolen money." "No, sir. Listen. You publicly humiliated an innocent woman." The lobby remained frozen. Nobody had ever seen Chidi this angry before. Tunde looked around desperately, searching for support. But nobody moved to help him now. Fear changes direction quickly. "I was protecting company standards," he argued, shakily. Chidi stepped closer, slowly. By framing cleaners, Tunde's breathing became uneven. "Sir, these lower workers manipulate sympathy all the time. Enough." The single word cut through the lobby like a blade. Complete silence followed again. Chidi looked toward the security guards. "Remove him from operational authority immediately." Shock flashed across Tunde's face. "Sir, your access cards, office systems, and executive permissions are suspended pending full investigation." Panic finally broke through his expression completely. "You cannot do this because of one cleaner." The sentence echoed across the lobby. And suddenly something inside Chidi snapped. One cleaner. As if poor people mattered less. As if dignity depended on salary. As if humanity came in ranks. Chidi stared at him with visible disgust. "She is more honorable than you." The words stunned the room. Tunde looked speechless. Meanwhile, Abeniola remained silent beside the security guards. Her tired eyes filled not with victory, but sadness. Because none of this should have happened at all. The company should never have become a place where cruelty thrived long enough to reach this point. Security officers carefully approached Tunde. "Sir, please surrender your access card." Humiliation flooded his face instantly. Only yesterday, employees feared him. Now those same workers watched silently while his power disappeared in public. For one dangerous second, anger twisted across his features. Then his eyes moved toward Abeniola. This woman manipulated everybody. He shouted desperately, "You think she is innocent because she looks poor?" Nobody answered. Even the employees who once feared him most now looked ashamed instead. Tunde pointed angrily toward Abeniola's shoes. She came into this building looking like a beggar. The insult echoed loudly through the lobby again. And this time, Chidi finally understood everything completely. The shoes, the voice, the eyes, the quiet strength, the pain. It all crashed together inside him at once. His mother. His own mother had been cleaning floors inside his company while being mocked for poverty by men working under his authority. A deep shame spread through his chest so powerfully that breathing became difficult. He remembered every ignored report, every missed warning, every moment he chose business growth over human truth. And suddenly, success itself felt ugly. The lobby remained silent while security escorted Tunda away slowly. Employees stepped aside, automatically watching the fall of a man who once controlled the entire building through fear. But Chidi barely noticed. His eyes remained fixed on Abeniola. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then quietly, almost painfully, Chidi whispered, "Mama." The word was soft, broken, full of disbelief and guilt. Gasps spread immediately across the lobby. Nkechi's eyes widened completely. Several employees stared at Abeniola in shock. The old cleaner slowly lifted her eyes toward her son, at last. And in that moment, the entire company realized the impossible truth. The poor janitor with cracked shoes was the billionaire CEO's mother. The silence inside the lobby felt unreal. Nobody moved after Chidi whispered the word, "Mama." Employees stared at Abeniola in complete shock. Security guards looked frozen beside Tunde. Even the executives standing near the elevator seemed unable to process what they had just heard. The poor janitor, the woman mocked for her shoes, was the billionaire CEO's mother. Tunde's face slowly drained of color. "No," he whispered under his breath. Chidi stepped closer toward Abeniola carefully, his eyes filled with disbelief and guilt. For several seconds, he looked at her as though trying to forgive himself and failing. "You?" His voice trembled slightly. "Why are you here?" Abeniola finally lifted her eyes fully toward her son. And for the first time since entering the company, employees saw something beyond her quiet humility. Strength. Not the strength of power, the strength of sacrifice. "I came to see the company you built," she answered softly. The words pierced Chidi's chest, because now he understood everything. The uniform, the silence, the old shoes. She had entered his company as an invisible worker to discover the truth he failed to see himself. Around them, nobody dared speak. Tunde finally stepped forward desperately. "Sir, I did not know." Chidi turned toward him instantly. "You did not know she was my mother," he interrupted coldly. "But you knew she was human." The sentence struck the lobby harder than shouting. Tunde opened his mouth again, searching for excuses. "Sir, operational pressure sometimes causes misunderstandings." "Misunderstanding." Chidi's voice hardened. "You planted evidence against an innocent woman." Several employees lowered their eyes immediately. "And this was not the first humiliation," Chidi continued quietly. "Was it?" Nobody answered, but silence itself became the answer. Chidi slowly looked around the lobby, at the frightened receptionists, at the nervous cleaners, at the junior staff pretending not to shake. For the first time, he truly saw the atmosphere inside his own company. Fear lived everywhere. And suddenly the polished building around him no longer looked impressive. It looked sick. Chidi faced the head of security. Call every department manager and executive board member to the conference hall immediately. The security officer nodded quickly. Yes, sir. Within minutes, tension spread through the building faster than ever before. Employees whispered in disbelief. The cleaner is the CEO's mother. Tunde framed her. There is an emergency executive meeting. Fear had changed direction now. For years, workers feared Tunde. Today, management feared truth. An hour later, the largest conference hall inside Okonkwo Global Holdings was completely full. Executives sat stiffly near the front, while department heads whispered nervously to one another. Receptionists, cleaners, accountants, assistants, and security guards stood quietly near the back walls. Nobody understood exactly what would happen next. At the center of the room stood Chidi. Beside him stood Abeniola, still wearing her faded cleaning uniform, still wearing the old cracked shoes. The contrast between mother and son looked almost painful. One dressed in billion-dollar success, the other dressed in the hidden suffering supporting that success. Tunde sat near the front, under security supervision, sweat visible across his forehead. The room became silent when Chidi finally spoke. For years he began slowly, I believe this company represented excellence. His voice echoed heavily through the hall. I believed the reports I received. I believed management systems were functioning. I believed people under my leadership were being treated fairly. Nobody moved. Then Chidi looked toward Abeniola, but the truth entered this company wearing a janitor's uniform. Several workers lowered their heads emotionally. Abeniola remained calm beside him. Chidi continued, My mother spent weeks inside this building as a cleaner. Shock still moved through some employees hearing it spoken openly. She cleaned your floors. She watched your behavior. She listened to your conversations. And while I sat in executive meetings discussing profits, his voice tightened slightly, people beneath me were being humiliated. Tunde stared downwards silently. Chidi faced him directly now. You reduced salaries unfairly. No answer. You publicly insulted workers. Silence again. You stole welfare funds meant for employees. Several executives shifted uncomfortably. And finally, you framed an innocent woman because you believed nobody important would defend her. The room felt suffocatingly quiet. Then, unexpectedly, Tunde stood up. Sir, I made mistakes, he admitted shakily. But I built operational discipline for this company. Profits increased because of my leadership. Chidi's expression remained cold. At what cost? Tunde looked desperate now. You cannot run a major corporation through emotions. A faint sadness crossed Abeniola's face hearing those words, because she remembered another man once saying something similar. Her own son. Tunde continued quickly. Workers need pressure. Fear creates efficiency. For several seconds, Chidi stared at him silently. Then he asked one simple question. When did fear become leadership? Nobody in the room could answer. Not even Tunde. Chidi slowly walked away from the podium and toward the workers standing at the back of the hall. For the first time in years, he truly looked at them individually. The cleaners, the receptionists, the guards, the assistants, human beings he once reduced into statistics and reports without realizing it. How many people here have been humiliated inside this company? The question shocked everyone. Nobody moved initially. Fear still controlled instinct. Then slowly, one receptionist raised her hand. Another followed. Then a cleaner. Then an accountant. Eventually, hands filled the room. Some workers even lowered their heads while raising them shame to admit their own suffering publicly. A deep pain crossed Chidi's face because suddenly he understood the truth completely. Tunde was guilty, but so was he. A leader who stops listening creates space for cruelty to grow beneath him. The billionaire CEO slowly turned back toward his mother. Abeniola stood quietly in her old shoes while watching him with sad but loving eyes. No anger, no revenge, only disappointment. That hurt him most of all. "Mama," he said softly, "why did you not tell me sooner?" The entire room became silent again. Abeniola answered gently, "Because I needed you to see with your own eyes." Emotion tightened across Chidi's face immediately. "I failed you." "No," she replied quietly. "You forgot something." The sentence settled deeply across the hall. Abeniola stepped forward slightly. When poor people become invisible inside a company, humanity begins dying there. Several workers wiped tears quietly. Even some executives looked ashamed now. Then Abeniola looked directly toward Tunde for the first time since entering the conference hall. "You mocked my shoes," she said softly. Tunde lowered his eyes immediately. These shoes walked through poverty while raising a child who once had a kind heart. The room remained completely still. Abeniola's voice stayed calm, but every word carried truth stronger than anger. "Never laugh at people because they are poor. Poverty is already painful enough." Tunde looked broken now, not because he lost power, because for the first time he understood how small he truly looked. Chidi slowly faced the room again. Effective immediately, he announced firmly, a full investigation into company operations will begin. Every welfare account, salary deduction, and disciplinary report will be audited independently. Executives nodded nervously. Employees who suffered unfair punishment will receive compensation. Murmurs spread emotionally through the room. And this company, Chidi, continued his voice heavy with shame and determination, will never again treat cleaners, guards, or junior workers as invisible. For the first time in many months, hope quietly entered the building. Not loud hope, careful hope. The kind, wounded people struggled to trust at first. And standing quietly beside the billionaire CEO, still wearing her janitor uniform and cracked black shoes, Abeniola finally saw the son she once raised, beginning to return. The conference hall emptied slowly after the emergency meeting ended. Nobody left unchanged. Executives walked out in silence, carrying shame heavier than their laptops. Department heads avoided eye contact with workers they once ignored. Employees whispered carefully in hallways, still struggling to believe the truth. The poor cleaner they watched suffer for weeks was the CEO's mother. But for Chidi Okonkwo, the shock went deeper than anyone understood. That evening, long after most staff left the building, he remained alone inside the conference hall, staring at the empty chair where Abeniola had sat. Rain pressed softly against the glass windows, overlooking Lagos. Inside the silence, guilt finally caught him completely. He remembered every warning his mother once gave him. Never treat poor people like they are invisible. Never allow success to make you arrogant. A company without compassion eventually destroys itself. And still, he failed to listen. The worst part was not Tunde's cruelty. The worst part was realizing cruelty had survived comfortably beneath his leadership because he stopped paying attention. A soft sound interrupted his thoughts. Abeniola entered quietly, still wearing her janitor uniform. Chidi immediately stood. Mama. The words sounded smaller now, more human. Abeniola smiled faintly. Sit down, my son. But he could not. Shame kept him standing. I did not know, he whispered painfully. I know. They humiliated you inside my company. Her eyes softened gently. Yes. The honesty hurt him more than anger would have. Chidi looked down at her shoes again, those same cracked black shoes. How long, he asked quietly. Several weeks. His chest tightened. You cleaned floors while people insulted you. I listened while they revealed themselves. For several moments, only rain filled the silence between them. Finally, Chidi spoke again. I became the kind of man you warned me about. No, Abeniola replied softly. You became distracted. He shook his head slowly. Good leaders do not become too distracted to see suffering. The sentence hung heavily in the room. Abeniola walked closer toward him carefully. My son, wealth is not evil. Power is not evil. But when powerful people stop seeing ordinary people, clearly pride quietly enters the heart. Chidi's eyes filled slightly with emotion. I failed those workers. Yes, she answered honestly. Again, truth without cruelty. That was always his mother's way. She never softened reality to protect comfort. But failure is not the end, she continued gently. Refusing to change is. Downstairs, meanwhile, tension still spread throughout the company. Employees remained gathered in small groups, discussing the day's events. Some workers looked relieved for the first time in years. Others worried about what would happen next. Near the reception desk, Nkechi quietly organized files before preparing to leave. Several receptionists approached her nervously. You defended her before anyone knew, one whispered. Nkechi gave a tired smile. I defended a person. Another employee lowered her voice carefully. Tunde is demanding another meeting with the CEO. Nkechi frowned immediately. Why? They say he wants to explain himself. Upstairs, inside a temporary security office, Tunde sat alone under supervision. For the first time in years, nobody treated him with fear. No assistants rushed to help him. No executives protected him. Power had vanished frighteningly fast, and beneath his humiliation, anger burned violently. Not shame, anger. He blamed Abeniola. He blamed Chidi. He blamed everyone except himself. Around 8 p.m., security informed Chidi that Tunde requested a final meeting before formal suspension procedures began. Abeniola quietly watched her son's face. You do not owe him another chance, she said gently. Chidi remained silent for several moments. Then he answered quietly, No. But maybe I owe myself the truth completely. The meeting happened in the executive boardroom. Rain continued falling heavily outside, while city lights reflected across the glass walls. Tunde entered, looking exhausted and desperate. His tie hung loose around his neck now, and fear had replaced arrogance in his eyes. Still, pride remained alive inside him. Across the table sat Chidi and Abeniola together. That alone unsettled him deeply. For years, he believed poor people existed beneath powerful people. Now the woman he mocked sat beside the billionaire CEO, while he stood disgraced before both of them. "Sit," Chidi said coldly. Tunde obeyed quietly. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then finally, Tunde looked toward Abeniola. "I did not know who you were." A painful silence followed. Abeniola answered softly, "That was never the real problem." Tunde looked away immediately. Chidi leaned forward slightly. "Why did you become like this?" The question sounded strangely personal, not as a CEO speaking to management, as a man trying to understand another man's cruelty. Tunde laughed bitterly under his breath. "You really want the truth, yes." For several moments, Tunde stared out toward the rain-covered city. Then finally, he spoke. "I grew up poor, too." Abeniola listened quietly. "My father cleaned buses. My mother sold vegetables." His jaw tightened. "People humiliated us constantly." Pain flickered across his face briefly before disappearing beneath anger again. "When I became successful, I promised myself I would never be weak again." Chidi watched him silently. Tunde continued bitterly. "You know what poor people learn? Nobody respects weakness. Nobody respects kindness. Fear is the only thing people obey." Abeniola shook her head slowly. "No," she said softly. "Fear is what wounded people use when they never heal." The sentence landed deeply. Tunde looked toward her sharply. "You think kindness built this company?" "No," she answered calmly. "Sacrifice did." Silence returned again. Then slowly Abeniola looked down at her old shoes. "These shoes carried food through rain so my son could attend school." Her voice remained gentle. "These shoes stood beside roads while people laughed at my poverty." Tunde lowered his eyes slightly. "But I never allowed suffering to turn me cruel." For the first time that night, real shame appeared on his face. Not because he lost his position, because he suddenly saw himself clearly. A man so desperate to escape poverty that he began humiliating people who reminded him of where he came from. Chidi finally stood. "Your employment with Okonkwo Global Holdings ends tonight." Tunde closed his eyes briefly. "The investigation into missing welfare funds will continue independently. If criminal charges follow the law, we'll decide the rest." The former operations manager nodded slowly. Defeat settled heavily across his face. Then unexpectedly, he looked toward Abeniola again. "I am sorry." The words sounded weak, unpracticed, but real. Abeniola studied him quietly for several moments. Then she answered softly, "I hope one day you learn that powerful people are not the only people deserving dignity." Tunde lowered his head completely. Security escorted him out quietly moments later. As the boardroom doors closed behind him, silence filled the room again. Chidi remained standing near the windows overlooking Lagos. His empire still glittered beautifully outside. But now he finally understood something important. Buildings could look successful, while souls inside them suffered. Slowly, he turned back toward his mother. Then, without caring who might see, the billionaire CEO walked across the room and knelt before her. Tears filled his eyes openly. "I'm sorry, Mama." Abeniola touched his face gently. And for the first time in many years, Chidi no longer looked like one of Africa's most powerful businessmen. He looked like a son again. The rain stopped sometime before dawn. By morning, Lagos woke beneath clear skies. But inside Okonkwo Global Holdings, nothing felt the same anymore. Employees entered the building cautiously, unsure what kind of atmosphere waited for them after the shocking events of the previous day. Some expected chaos. Others feared mass dismissals. Many simply carried quiet anxiety the way wounded people do after surviving a storm. But when workers stepped into the lobby that morning, they immediately noticed something different. The fear was gone. Not completely, but enough to feel the absence. Receptionists no longer stood trembling behind their desks. Security guards greeted employees without panic in their eyes. Cleaners moved through hallways without rushing like hunted people. And near the center of the lobby stood a large notice signed personally by Chidi Okonkwo. A full independent audit of staff treatment, salary deductions, and welfare programs had officially begun. Several executives connected to financial abuse were suspended pending investigation. Workers unfairly penalized under Tunde's policies would receive compensation. New employee protection systems were being created immediately. People stopped in front of the notice, silently reading every line twice. Some workers looked emotional. Others looked stunned. For years, nobody believed management would ever truly listen. Now the company itself seemed to be waking up. Around 9 a.m., Chidi entered the building quietly, without bodyguards or executive escorts. Employees greeted him nervously, unsure how to behave after learning the truth about Abeniola. But something about the CEO looked different too. Less distant, less cold. As he crossed the lobby, his eyes no longer moved past cleaners and receptionists automatically. He noticed faces now. Tiredness, anxiety, humanity. Pain had reopened his vision. Upstairs, Abeniola sat quietly inside a small executive lounge, wearing one of her normal dresses again instead of the janitor uniform. But beside her chair rested the old black shoes. Chidi noticed them immediately when he entered. "You kept them," he said softly. Abeniola smiled faintly. "These shoes carried me through many seasons." He sat beside her quietly. For several moments, neither spoke. Then finally, Chidi lowered his eyes. "I cannot stop thinking about everything that happened here while I ignored it." Abeniola studied her son carefully. "Guilt is only useful if it changes you." The sentence settled deeply inside him. "I thought success meant protecting the company at all costs," he admitted quietly. "I forgot companies are people first." "Yes," she answered gently. "Buildings do not suffer. Human beings do." Downstairs, meanwhile, employees gathered nervously inside the main conference hall for another company-wide meeting. Unlike previous meetings under Tunde, this room felt different. No forced smiles, no rehearsed fear, just uncertainty. When Chidi finally entered beside Abeniola, silence filled the hall immediately. Workers stared at the woman they once knew only as Mama Benny, the cleaner. Some looked ashamed. Others emotional. And Nkechi sat near the front, holding her breath quietly. Chidi stepped forward slowly. "I owe this company an apology," he began. The honesty shocked many people immediately. "For too long, I measured success only through reports, profits, and expansion. While I celebrated growth, many workers inside this building carried humiliation silently. No one moved. I trusted systems without listening to people. His eyes moved across the room carefully. That failure belongs to me. Several employees lowered their heads emotionally because powerful people rarely admitted fault publicly. Chidi continued calmly. Starting today, this company changes. He announced new welfare protections, independent staff complaint systems, mental health support, and salary review programs for lower workers. Then he paused briefly before continuing. And one more thing. The room became still again. No employee at Okonkwo Global Holdings will ever again be treated as invisible. A quiet, emotional murmur spread through the hall. Near the front row, Nkechi wiped tears quickly from her eyes. Chidi noticed her immediately. Nkechi Adeyemi. The young woman looked startled, standing up nervously. Yes, sir. For weeks, while others stayed silent, you defended someone. Everyone believed powerless. The room turned toward her. You protected dignity when it was dangerous to do so. Nkechi lowered her eyes shyly. I only did what felt right, sir. Chidi nodded slowly. And people like you are exactly who this company needs. Before the entire hall, he announced her reinstatement to reception leadership, along with a scholarship program supporting her brother's education completely. Shock crossed Nkechi's face instantly. Sir, you carried responsibility alone long enough. Tears finally rolled down her cheeks, openly. Workers around her began quietly clapping, not loud corporate applause, real applause, the kind born from genuine emotion. Abeniola watched silently beside her son, warmth finally returning to her tired eyes. For the first time since entering the company disguised as a cleaner, she felt hope growing stronger than sadness. The meeting ended differently from any company gathering before it. People stayed behind talking, actually talking. Cleaners spoke openly with supervisors. Receptionists laughed carefully near the hall entrance. Even security guards smiled more freely. The atmosphere still carried scars, but healing had begun. Later that evening, after most employees left, Chidi walked through the now quiet lobby beside his mother. Sunset painted golden reflections across the marble floors. This building feels different already, he admitted softly. Because people feel seen, Abeniola replied. Near the entrance, a cleaner accidentally dropped several papers while rushing past them. Instantly, fear flashed across the young woman's face. Then she froze completely after recognizing the CEO standing nearby. I am sorry, sir. The panic in her voice hurt Chidi deeply because he finally understood what his leadership created. Slowly, he bent down himself and helped gather the papers. The cleaner stared in shock. It is all right, he said gently. When the young woman hurried away afterward, Abeniola smiled quietly beside him. The little boy I raised is still alive after all. Chidi laughed softly for the first time in many days. Before leaving the building, he stopped near the glass entrance and removed a large shopping bag from his office desk nearby. I bought something for you, he said. Abeniola looked curious. Inside the bag sat a pair of elegant new black shoes made from soft leather. Beautiful, expensive, carefully chosen. Emotion crossed her face immediately. My son, you deserve better than pain. Abeniola touched the shoes gently. Then she looked down at the old cracked pair beside her chair. Slowly, she smiled. "I will wear these sometimes," she said softly while touching the new shoes. "But I will keep the old ones too." Why? Her eyes moved across the lobby one final time. "Because these old shoes remind me what happens when people forget the value of ordinary human beings." The sentence stayed with Chidi long after they left the building together that night. Outside Lagos remained loud, crowded, imperfect, and alive. Street vendors still struggled beside busy roads. Workers still fought daily battles invisible to the wealthy. But somewhere inside the giant tower of Okonkwo Global Holdings, something important had changed forever. A company once ruled by fear had finally begun learning compassion again. And it all started because one old woman walked through marble halls wearing cracked black shoes nobody thought were worth respecting. After years of chasing power, money, and status, many people forget one painful truth. The world is held together by ordinary people whose struggles often go unseen. The cleaner who opens the office before sunrise, the guard standing through long nights, the receptionist hiding tears behind a professional smile. These people carry invisible burdens every day, while still choosing dignity. This story reminds us that kindness is never weakness. In fact, the strongest people are often those who continue showing compassion after life has wounded them deeply. Wealth can build tall buildings, but only humanity can build a place where people truly feel safe, respected, and valued. Never laugh at someone because of old clothes, tired shoes, or humble work. You may be mocking a story of sacrifice you could never survive yourself. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced a moment where someone judged you unfairly? And if you believe the world still needs stories about compassion, justice, healing, and hope, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who needs encouragement today.